Thank you, Kevin and Ron, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for the presentation today. Presentation is called UiPath Builds Positive Candidate Experiences into Their Recruiting Process. And I'm really excited about talking with UiPath today. And before I get into that, though, I want to just mention that we are going to handle all the questions in chat today. So if you have a question, go ahead, pop it into chat, and we will answer it as we are going along here in the presentation. Yes. My name is Ian Alexander. I'm co-founder of the Survale Talent Feedback Platform, and I am happy to be joined today by Vanessa Silva, who is Senior Director of Global Talent Acquisition for one of our clients, UiPath. So welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you. Thank you. Excited to be here.
So excited for you to be with us and to talk about how UiPath is putting candidate experience at the front end of their hiring process. What I thought I'd do before we jumped into everything is ask you to talk a little bit about your background, kind of what brought you to UiPath and what your focus is there.
Sure. I've been in recruiting now, I think 15 years. It feels really weird to say that. And really have been focused on, I'd say, majority of my time on technical recruiting in various organizations I've been in. Dabbled a bit in operations as well, but primarily focused, I'd say, heavily the last 6 years in technical recruiting and leading technical recruiting teams. And I'd say what brought me to UiPath is a couple of things. One is just a new industry, an emerging kind of company in a newer, earlier stage than what I've been used to, and just a ton of opportunity to reimagine and re-envision how recruiting is done within UiPath and being able to help scale and grow the company. So those were the big reasons why I made the jump.
Awesome. And UiPath's had quite a growth spurt here in the last few years for sure, I know.
Yes.
Um, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about UiPath, and you can kind of give us an overview of that. We'll talk about kind of how UiPath has kind of used listening technology in their recruiting process, and how they've used that data to optimize not only the candidate experience but also aligning hiring teams and getting sort of distributed teams working more efficiently together. And then finally, we'll wrap up and talk about some of the things that have changed, some of the initiatives that you've done based on using listening technology in your recruiting. So with that, let's jump right in. You tell us a little bit about UiPath. I'd love to understand kind of what the company does, the makeup of your recruiting teams, kind of the most important roles you're hiring for these days, that kind of thing. So, Vanessa.
Yeah. So RPA technology, I'd say, is it's been around, but it's kind of become more popular the last few years. And UiPath is leading in the industry in a lot of ways. And I think in simple layman's terms, most people equate just robotic process automation with really kind of taking mundane tasks that you do day in and day out that I've done myself, where I'm saying, why do I do this? Why can't this just be automated? And so in a very basic form, the technology that UiPath does really focuses on those across multiple verticals, across industries. It's industry agnostic, and really helping to simplify the process for companies. And really kind of realizing the potential of your employee base, and giving them the space and the opportunity to work on things that are actually, I'd say, more impactful, and leaving kind of the repetitive tasks to the automation process. So that's, in a very, very simple, basic terms, what the technology does. In terms of our company, as you can see here, we're around 4,000 employees now. And our team within recruiting, we sit around 45 recruiters globally. Our talent acquisition team is a bit bigger because we have our coordinators and branding and such, and operations. But from a recruitment team perspective, around 45 recruiters. Globally distributed, I'd say our biggest hubs are here in North America, as well in Bucharest, Romania, and spread obviously across different countries in APAC, but particularly India is another big footprint for us. So as you can see here, we do a lot of hiring every year, and each touch point is super critical. And I'd say right now, hyper focused on growing our product and engineering organization. We continue to build on go to market and sales and have some corporate roles too. But remaining of this fiscal year, we're really focused on engineers, our applied scientists, and really ensuring that we have our product and engineering support groups fully staffed and running with our product roadmap.
Sounds like a formidable challenge.
Yes.
Obviously, technology is the core of what UiPath does, and with the kind of roles you're talking about hiring, getting the right people obviously is very important. Curious as to how you see candidate experience sort of playing a role in sort of meeting that challenge. What's important about candidate experience and hitting that goal?
Yeah, I think I mean the candidate experience is everything. Both internally, if you think about just how we show up to candidates and what vibe they get from us in when they're talking not only to a recruiter but also the hiring manager or anyone in the interview process. And then beyond that, even we're asking candidates to take out sometimes 5 hours or more of their lives to meet with us and speak with us. And if we can't make that experience as memorable and as positive as possible, it's going to be really hard to convince them why UiPath is a place they may want to consider for their next phase in their career journey. And so we place a lot of importance on those moments because of the fact that even if they end up not making the decision to join, we want them to leave the experience with a positive impression of us as a company.
Gotcha. I imagine it's sort of an investment that pays a dividend at the offer stage.
Oh yes, 100%.
Primarily.
That's what we're working towards, right? But we know
Yeah.
that doesn't always pan out.
Yeah.
And so you got to make it matter no matter what the outcome is.
Okay. And so because this is a conference sort of based around technologies, can you give us an overview of what sort of basic recruiting technologies you're using?
Sure, yeah. So our applicant tracking system and our will be live CRM pretty soon here are both iCIMS. And we've been working with them the last year-ish, went live just this year, but been partnering with them to go live. And so newly using system, but it's going well. In terms of assessments, more on the technical side, we're using HackerRank. And there's a built-in kind of API to iCIMS, which is great. It's pretty seamless there. And then on the interviewing side, as most of us in the world probably had to do, we have a heavy reliance on Zoom to conduct our virtual interviews to make sure that in those moments where we can't be on site, which is still quite prevalent, we are able to still make connections with talent and keep recruitment moving forward. So that would be Zoom that we're using right now for interviewing.
Gotcha. And then, I also with those specialized roles, the assessment process can be pretty intense and pretty long. And I like the way that you talked about sort of the investment that you're asking them to make in terms of time. That can be pretty long, and with those more technical roles. So very interesting. So let's talk about your focus on listening technology. Obviously, it's been a tough couple of years for everyone, recruiters especially. I know that UiPath obtained Survale probably December of 19, so just before the pandemic. How do you think, between COVID, remote recruiting, Great Resignation? I don't know if what's the latest one that we're working on right now? Where people are not working very hard. Oh, quiet resignation, right?
Oh,
So we're
yeah.
doing quiet resignation. Just curious, how do you believe those changes have affected your hiring teams? And by the same token, how has your ability to sort of understand and react to candidate experiences in real time helped UiPath kind of navigate these last tumultuous couple of years?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't think we could have better timed our partnership with Survale, just given shortly thereafter, kind of the world turned upside down, and we had to pivot the world that we knew or the way that we knew completely to a virtual setting. And so, in that pivot, there were a lot of different touch points that we knew and understood from an in-person standpoint. So if you think about it, candidate would come on site, there'd be travel, and we had all that kind of fluid and working quite seamlessly. And overnight, we had to switch to this fully virtual, fully remote kind of process. And while, on the surface, it's like looking back, it's much more simple. During the time, there was a lot of uncertainty and really not just for employers and companies, but also candidates, and trying to understand, how do I convey who I am and how do I connect with these interviewers in a way that I am not used to, which is through a screen. And so through that, and leveraging Survale and kind of really paying attention to the feedback that was coming in via the process, we were really able to stay close to the candidates and understand the experience through them, looking at the feedback, so that we knew how to better adjust how we were showing up and how we were facilitating an interview process. And the big thing with that is, as you can imagine, when someone was coming on site, you physically could meet them, you could talk to them in the room, you could kind of gauge the experience quite easily, because in person you're picking up on different cues. And then when you're done and you're escorting them out of the building, or you're just connecting with them live, you're getting real-time feedback. That's not as easy in a virtual environment. So we had a huge reliance on Surveil and the feedback coming in from our surveys to help us adjust quickly and better the experience, or modify or change the experience to make it even more actionable for the next talent coming through.
Yeah, and it's also shows, it's a way that you can kind of show transparency, a sort of reality to, hey, we're real people, we want to hear from you, we want to interact with you. Just asking a lot of times can kind of give that vibe, as you said before,
Yeah.
across.
And our culturally here at UiPath, we put a lot of time and investment in our culture, and so listening technology helps us keep a really close pulse, even internally in our employee base. And so it helps kind of, as you're saying, be an extension of who we are as a company. That we do care, we truly do care, and we truly do look at the data. Because it allows us to evolve and adjust and pivot based on what we're hearing about what's working and what's not, to constantly, help improve ourselves as an organization.
Great. And so, on that note, let's talk about exactly, or sort of at a high level, how you're using Surveil, sort of what your goal is for the feedback, how you're using it at a high level right now.
Yeah, so at a high level, we have it at three stages of the process. After, recruiter touch point, there's the panel interview, and then offer. And so we believe those kind of three moments are where we want to focus our energy, to make sure that how we're showing up and the experience we're creating are positive for candidates. And I'd say, kind of keeping it high level, each of those moments has different questions that we ask, and different things that we're looking for, to better understand how we're facilitating kind of the entire experience. And what it does is it helps us then pivot either a process or our preparation for that particular stage, so that we are responding real time to the feedback coming in, and feeling like we're showing up the best we can.
That's great. Well, how much of, as an organization, how much of your orientation is toward, we've got to make these candidates more satisfied, and versus, we're trying to learn what's kind of going right and wrong so we can optimize these processes? I know it's probably two sides of the same coin, right? But
Yeah.
I'm always curious as to, people, especially as we're at a candy event here, a lot of that's about satisfaction. How satisfied are our candidates? And that's ultimately what you want to do. But a lot of the value is just really in what those candidates are telling you and how you can optimize.
Yeah, and I'd say the processes feed into the experience. So if your process is broken, or there's some kind of kink in the process, it's going to show up in the feedback in different ways. And so that's how we leverage the feedback. Not so much, I mean, the candidate experience is at the end goal, what we're actually focused on, but it does help us then go back and review our own existing internal processes to say, okay, this seems like a pain point or something that's not feeling really good for the talent that we're talking to. How do we then go back and assess what we're doing internally to make adjustments and improvements using some of that feedback, but really taking just another look at how we've designed the process to better understand if it's still working as it was intended, or what adjustments can be made to then ultimately more positively impact the experience for everyone.
Right. And so sort of when we look at those stages, I've kind of got them in here within the continuum, right? Of,
Mhm.
there's everything from your candidates are coming to your career site and they're learning about they're researching your company, they're seeing your jobs, they're responding to them. That's a point of optimization. The application process, obviously, some are easier than others. Uh, Phone screen, which is, you talked about your initial interview, and then another interview, and then offer, or kind of where UiPath is focused. So when we look at that, can you talk a bit about kind of what you're trying to learn at each stage, and what you're asking at those stages?
Sure. Yeah. So on the phone screen stage, really, there's kind of it's probably the lightest of the three surveys. And one area of focus is, did you feel like you got enough information to understand the process ahead, and feel informed about what to expect moving forward? Another one is really just asking, how was your experience with your recruiter? Did you again get the information that you felt you needed? Did you get a better understanding of the company and the role that you're interested in, and left overall feeling more informed? And that's generally the gist of the phone screen. We don't focus too much on other things outside of that, because usually at that stage it's a pretty light touch point with the candidate. The interview is kind of where I think we spend a lot of time, in the sense of really understanding and wanting to understand what that looks like for the candidate. And so that survey really focuses on a couple things, like interview team preparedness, like were the questions relevant to the role? How did your interviewer show up, in the sense, did you feel that they were prepared and that they were able to convey the opportunity to you? And were you assessed at a level or in a way that you felt was relevant to what you thought you were interviewing for? And then beyond that, it does go back a little bit to, did you feel prepared for that interview? And that ties back a little bit to the recruiter, and how the recruiter or UiPath is setting up the candidates to succeed in their interviews to the extent that they can. And then I think beyond that, it is looking at process and logistics, and understanding, is it clunky? Is there too much time in between when you're hearing from us? And just a couple questions around, what did that look like or feel like for you as a candidate? And so it really kind of looks at recruiter, I don't want to say behavior, but recruiter, how they're showing up for the candidate. It looks at how the hiring team is showing up for the candidate and how they're leaving the candidate feeling. And then also just our systems and processes and all of our supporting teams also showing up the way we intend. So it's kind of a three-part there. And then lastly, at offer, we actually send two different surveys. We want to understand, for those who accepted, what that experience was for them, and what really drove them to want to accept, and how did that process feel for them. But similarly, we also want to hear from the folks who declined, not so much to understand why, although that is partially why we want to understand. It's also kind of, what were those moments in the process that led you to say no? And can you help us understand, if it was something that we could have done differently that led you to say no? What is that? And so it gives us good insights into, where can we impact that and where can we not? Because some of it was career aspirations or industry interest, a different industry. And some of that is out of our control, but we always ask the question, how likely are you to refer UiPath? as a place that you'd recommend to someone to apply to. And so that is always something we want to understand, even if they said no, is, are you still leaving with a positive impression from us?
Yeah, and I have to mention for everybody watching that I've seen your declined offer dashboard, and I've just glowing comments from all your candidates and high scores. So you all are doing something right there, because that's not always the case when someone declines an offer. There's sometimes a
Yeah,
lot of good reason in the recruiting process to do that.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's always a bummer when you get a decline. You never want one, but you want it for the reasons that are out of your control versus ones where you're like, we should have done better in that moment. So,
Yeah.
thanks for that.
Yeah, and with declined offers, I think it's just such a valuable, even more so than the accepted offers, right? Because
Agree.
you've got this sort of selection bias there, that everybody's happy, they got the job, they got an
Exactly.
A, they scored.
Yeah.
So you're getting a lot of good stuff, but it's all good stuff. And in the declined offers, you get that sometimes that feedback that just is hard to hear, and not for you, obviously, but also to just know at any given time, not guess why people are not taking your offers, but absolutely have the data day in and day out to back it up. So if you do spot a problem with, I think we ought to really look at comp for certain positions, or, I think we ought to be looking at something that's going to require some movement, elsewhere in the organization. You've got that data right there to kind of back it up. Whether or not it's something that goes forward or not, at least, you've got that data.
Yeah, it's highly useful, the data to help support what we see and feel on the ground as recruiters and recruiting teams when we're talking to leaders. And Survale's data helps support our argument because it's even showing up from candidates, their
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Well, and also kind of what I love, and this kind of gets back to the alignment portion of it, is you've really kind of aligned your people and your processes around candidate experience. And the reason I say that is because feedback's going to recruiters, it's going to leadership, it's going to hiring managers. And so you have everybody sort of using a common set of metrics there, beyond the time to fill and, the sort of core metrics. Um, so and the good part of that is it puts the candidate voice kind of at the center day in and day out. Can you talk a little bit about how that looks from your perspective in terms of working with and managing hiring teams, hiring managers, recruiters, et cetera, how that sort of alignment looks from your standpoint?
Yeah, there's an example I could probably speak to that's probably more recent where I wouldn't say recent actually. I'd say post going remote. We saw a lot of feedback coming in around candidates not feeling prepared for what to expect with their interviews. And so we started to look at that and better understand what was happening and how can we address that. And there was a couple points that came through. It was things we could be doing on our end, where we actually implemented or created guides, interview kind of prep guides that rather than relying on a recruiter to verbalize that, we instilled it or instituted into our process, and it's automatically sent when we confirm with the candidate. Just a prep guide for depending on which role or profile they're interviewing for, just to give them some additional information that they could reference that was tangible and understand how to prepare for that. We also took that back to the interview teams because it was also a lack of alignment on some parts within our own interview teams and not really preparing for the interviews and ensuring that what they're asking is actually aligned to what we were communicating in terms of how to prepare. And so what it did was not only helped us kind of review our own process, but it helped us work with hiring teams to demonstrate the importance of staying aligned in the process, but also taking the time out to prepare for your interviews and make sure that when you're showing up for that interview, you know what you're supposed to be asking, and it's aligned with how we've prepared a candidate for that process. And ultimately, if you think about that, it just helps us down the road because it means better alignment with the interview teams. It meant better alignment with the recruiting team and the interviewers, and ultimately just a more focused hiring process so that we can make decisions faster and hopefully hire talent faster too.
Yeah, speed. That's definitely an issue.
Yes.
Um, so you've got all this great data, and you've kind of tied to sort of key recruiting stages. Can you talk about how you use the data as a recruiting leader, as a manager of these teams?
Yeah, so it's kind of multi-leveled. So from I'd say a TA manager standpoint that's working directly with recruiters and hiring managers, kind of frontline. Um, I'd say our heaviest usage comes there where managers are working with their recruiting teams and the hiring managers to look at this pretty frequently. I'd say at least weekly to just pick up any trends or anything coming out that we need to immediately react to more quickly, and just kind of seeing how their team is performing relative to what we expect of them. And when I say them, I mean recruiters. So that's kind of TA managers. From my altitude, I oversee product and engineering globally. So I'm less concerned about one recruiter. I take more of a global view to see how are we doing regionally, and how's the sentiment from our candidate population regionally. And I use that in my QBRs and my MBRs with leaders to just give them a sense of how we're doing and where I need some support from them in areas that might be showing up that are related to the hiring team specifically. And so I mentioned that, preparedness for interviews, we saw it creeping up in a pocket of one particular team. And so we were able to really address that and isolate kind of where that is, and address it more, I'd say, quickly, and also just have support and a reminder to the entire organization around the need to keep this front and center, even though we know recruiting can get exhausting. People sometimes don't prioritize their time well. This remains kind of a priority because we're still in growth stage as an organization, and recruiting will be a huge part of everyone's day to day as we continue to scale the org. And then
Sure.
I'd say, from a global talent acquisition level, we look at this to inform, as you mentioned, like, is our career site, the application process, how's that going? Where do we need to make adjustments there? Or how can we optimize the process internally when we are confirming candidates to automatically send certain information so that we alleviate the administrative burden on our recruiters? So I'd say kind of at a top level, it helps to inform also the compensation. Where are we having issues continuously that we might need to bring to the compensation team? And so it kind of at multiple levels, depending on the altitude that you're operating from, it gives us data that helps inform what we do with that, and at kind of how broad the potential issue is, or how acute or focused that issue is that we have to address.
Sure. And just for everybody who can't sort of see how that data is consumed, you ask for, and you mentioned this earlier, you ask for sort of a candidate NPS question at each stage, and you can kind of look for issues based on, are we seeing dips in candidate sentiment in this area or this area. So you've got this high level view that can be just simply monitoring candidate experience and candidate satisfaction, and then you can drill down into that, down into, as you say, regions, even down to individual recruiters or hiring managers, and analyze, okay, what's really going on here. So it has that sort of stratification built in. So it's useful for sort of everybody in the process, because there's a place to kind of plug in at whatever level you happen to be operating at.
Yep, it's highly useful.
Well, let's talk about a little bit about some of the changes that have kind of come about at UiPath based on the Survale analytics.
Yeah, I think a big one that's kind of more at the bottom of the bullet points here, but was huge for us, was offer acceptance rates. We had seen quite the dip in offer acceptance rate at one point, and we weren't sure what was driving it. We had gut feel what it could be, but we used a lot of the data and the results, and looking at that offer decline survey data to help us really understand where do we have control in that process and where do we not, just given macroeconomic factors or other things that are at play. So that really helped because there were a couple nuggets that we pulled out that we absolutely had an opportunity to do better. And while I can't fully say that those changes were the reason the offer acceptance rate went up, the rate it did, we did see a jump of over 16 percentage points over a quarter in offer acceptance rates. And I'd like to attribute some of that to the changes we made based off the feedback we got from the results, and adjustments to the process. Who knows fully, but hey, I like to believe that that is contributing to that. And I think, other things here I've talked a little bit about, but really kind of helping our recruiters understand that taking the consultative approach versus more of a transactional approach to recruiting is just so critical, not just for, internal TA brand perception, but just the overall experience that you are generally responsible for when it comes to those candidates, and how you help them through a process that is quite huge. Is a huge moment for a lot of people making a career shift, and people look to recruiters to help them through that and we play a pretty important role in that. And so helping people to see that those moments matter, and it all comes down to key points in the process and how they show up in those moments for candidates, has been really helpful for us to start to shift a mindset, even within our own internal recruiting team, about who we are and what that role is that we play. And I just think, beyond that, again, this data-driven feedback, shifting from this anecdotal, I have a gut feel, or, I'm hearing this, and kind of when you're talking to engineers, especially, or any leader, they're like, well, show me the data that actually supports that. This has enabled Survale, and the results has enabled us to not rely just on what we've said, and not actually expect us to manually track the data. It's all here, and available for us to use when we need it, as we need it, and we can look at it in different time spans and really understand how it's evolved.
And we're kind of running out of time here, but I'm curious, are you using any of the feedback data in sort of performance management for the recruiters themselves in terms of, review time, incentives, that type of stuff?
Yeah, we definitely, I wouldn't say we have a kind of hard and fast like number that we've assigned to folks, but we absolutely bring it up in recurring one-on-ones, in kind of quarterly check-ins, because it is an important point and an important expectation that we have of our recruiting team. So absolutely leveraging it.
Awesome. Well, we are out of time. So if you have additional questions that you haven't asked during the presentation, you can visit survale.com. You can email me if you've got questions that occur to you later at ian@survale.com. And we are going to be sending out in follow-up a case study that we did with UiPath, that we're just releasing here now. And so we'll send you a link. With that, Vanessa, thank you so much. I think it's
Thank you.
great hearing about UiPath and everything that you're doing. Everybody who joined us, thank you so much, and have a great day.